Jeff says, what do you think of Tom Bassis saying the 2026 engine rules aren't finalized yet? Yeah, so this is a strange one because, I mean, for the most part, they are finalized. And they would have to be because obviously the teams have spent not only a lot of time, but lots and lots of money. There was talk that Alpine would have been spending roughly $50 to $90 million a year at one point on the 2026 rules, especially because, you know, in the build-up, there's not as strict regulations on the investment. You're also having to build up facilities, not just the engine, all these sorts of things. So to change the rules would be interesting. But I guess the point of this is they have kept some part of the regulation open to interpretation to the point of they can change things. Again, the way I need to phrase this is, it's not so much that they'll just out and out change the rules if, for example, they find out that Mercedes have gotten a massive margin over Ferrari, for example, or over Audi. It's more, I guess, that these rules are open to interpretation as always. And I think what he's saying is they reserve the right to close up any interpretive moments or interpretive regulations here. So, for example, let's say that the rules could be interpreted that you can build the hybrid motor or the battery to do X thing, and it will give you a huge advantage, and the investment to do it would be massive. The FIA basically reserves the right to say, no, sorry, Mercedes, that's not allowed. And we're clarifying those rules with this technical directive. And therefore, it closes everything up, right? As we see with flexi wings, with everything else all the time in the rest of the regulations, I would gather that's more what they're talking about. Basically, keeping themselves in a situation where there's not, some sort of huge thing that could be found that would give Mercedes such a big advantage that we have another 2014. And in fact, when they were talking about this, they essentially did say pretty blatantly, we don't want another 2014 with these engine regulations. Now, the thing I will say is I would not be surprised if they don't clamp down in such a way to do that. I would say that they would more likely issue technical directives for 2026 into 2027 to give the manufacturers time to change these things, to allow a manufacturer who finds something crazy to at least enjoy the benefits of it if it's within the regulations and just open to interpretation for a certain amount of time. So I think how that will be handled will be interesting, but I think it's more of a warning shot to the teams not to push it with their interpretations, not to go too deep into those gray areas because the FIA basically wants to clamp down. Now, in a more grand scheme of looking at what this means, though, outside of the actual black and white interpretations of the regulation, I think it does say a lot about how concerned the FIA is about this regulation set. And, look, I give the FIA a lot of stick constantly because, well, they deserve it. But I think this is the FIA basically reacting to the fact that the FOM has put them in a pretty poor, like a piss poor situation here. Because, look, FIA have kind of final say. They own Formula One to an extent. But the commercial rights holder basically was setting the tone of these regulations from the outset because FOM, Liberty Media, wanted to get more manufacturers in and essentially have painted themselves into this corner of what could be a pretty shit regulation set if it goes as expected by pushing for these new hybrid 50% power units. And that's boxed them into this corner. And the FIA have been reactive to that over the past few years, and we've seen that from how the chassis is going. Instead of focusing on dirty air and better racing, they've instead been focusing on how to make up for the downsides of the engine, which is a bad situation to be in. And I think this is just another thing of the FIA trying their best to give them some credit for a change to ensure that they can stay on top of the racing not being terrible. But yeah, I think my concern is saying this so late tells us that they're probably concerned that one or two teams at least, or one or two engine manufacturers at least, are going to have a huge advantage over the others. And that, for example, Mercedes may find like half a second to a second purely in the engine, which would mean that, the Mercedes powered teams, McLaren and Mercedes, for example, could end up being, vastly ahead of everyone else. while Ferrari and, everyone else sits way back and they're trying to basically get on top of that. So yeah, look, I wouldn't read too much into it for now, but it's yet another example of just a bit of dread and fear that this new regulation could take us from what we have now, which is an extremely close field. Unfortunately, McLaren being far ahead of it since the technical directive, but a situation where we could go from having just an incredibly close field spread of like 2/10 being the difference between third and 15th in qualifying to another 2014 where, Mercedes are a second ahead at the front of the field. So it is a little bit worrying, but I'm not going to read too much into it for now. I guess we'll have to see next year, but it's a little bit concerning that they're saying stuff like that this late into the regulation build-up.